Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Good. We had a fancy event this weekend.
We did.
You know what was really sad about it? Is we had a lot of people who wanted to come, and we couldn't get a big enough room under short notice. But, of course, we talked about Bretton Woods. It was a 50th anniversary of when that policy that was designed to last forever crashed and burned, and the gold standard disappear. And the event that I always tell people was really got me excited about speaking out on monetary policy and connected monetary policy with foreign policy and domestic policy and spending and just everything, a lot more than most people realize. And I think the founders sort of understood this because they said, continental money was terrible. It all went to dust. And we want to put some rules in here. Nothing but gold and silver is legal tender.
Yeah, no, it was a great time. We had a great crowd, and it was our return to holding conferences after a forced hiatus of last year. We had the great Jim Grant there, and the two of you on stage with Paul Martin Foss was great. And it was really funny for me because it was at a brewery. It was a special room in a brewery. And just a moment for me is when Jim Grant leaned over to you and he said, "Is it normal for people to be drinking beer this early in the morning?" I just thought that was hilarious. But everyone had a really good time, I think, and I really enjoyed meeting so many great supporters and friends.
It turned out real well. And there were days when I think, well, things are opening up, and they have in the last 6 months, but our governor is coming around, and he has to fight some battles, but still, it's a mess. Why is it so hard to recapture our liberties? It's easy to take them away.
Yeah.
But you know what? After I got home, a short time after that, I like to flip channels and see what the conventional wisdom is and see if I have to change my mind on any issue. But there was a foreign policy issue going on. It was all day, and it's been a while, Daniel, since we've had an event happening overseas of great significance. They're happening all the time, and we try to call attention to some of the stupid things we're doing. But yesterday, it couldn't be resisted. Liberals and conservatives had to talk about Afghanistan. And of course, that was an event that was dated, 20 years.
Yeah.
We've been there 20 years, and leaving, and guess what? They added up the score, and we lost.
Yeah.
We lost another one, and of course it brought back memories about the rescue operation at the end of the Vietnam War. Yeah. But I was looking at that, the escape at the last minute, that line of people trying to get on that little helicopter.
Yeah.
What was going on there, it was in 1975, and Ford was president, and we had already evacuated. We were done. Excuse me. We evacuated 2 years before that. We had our military out. So a lot of times we say, let's get the military out and we'll maintain a force that's quiet, which we always object to. If you want to get out, you just get out. Yeah. But anyway, there were people in there, military people, CIA people, and whatnot. So the Vietnamese, the communists, did not like that, and they finally said, "You guys are leaving," and that was the final blow. But the point I'm making is, when you leave, you ought to leave, and you maybe we can emphasize some lessons on leaving. And our friend McGregor had a few suggestions on what to do. So a lot of times it's so discouraging to lose out. But the most that we should do, even when I talked about the tragedies of the wars in the Middle East, I always try to get people to say, well, we have to get a lesson from this. A lot of times they would argue and they say, we can't leave. The one that aggravated me most is we can't lose face.
Yeah.
We lose tens of thousands of people and kill a million. And they say, well, we can't waste those lives in the past. Well, they're already wasted.
Yeah.
So anyway, there are lessons to be learned. And once again, McGregor tried to prevent some of this, but that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, we can talk about that too. But so much for Biden's victory parade. We're supposed to have a 9/11 20-year victory parade. That probably not going to be the event that he was hoping for. And also so much for the intelligence community, which told us, well, Kabul might fall in 90 days. Well, it turned into 90 minutes. And that's what we always say. This is how regimes fall. This is how empires fall. This is how paradigms change and shift. It happens quickly all of a sudden. The center can no longer hold. Perhaps our own economic or other collapse may happen in just a similar way when the checks don't get cashed. But it was a dramatic moment. It was an incredible moment. People scrambling, people trying to, literally hanging on to the landing gear of the military transport aircraft, and some of them actually falling off to their deaths.
Wow.
Awful, awful scenes, but it was all predictable, right?
Right. But you know, the other factor here that we've talked about in the past is how do forces that seem not to have a chance of victory taking on powerful nations like our colonists did with the British Empire.
Yeah.
And I think it's the issue of the homeland. You know, when people are seen as outsiders invading the homeland, yes, lifestyles and philosophy and all this is something, but there's something very attractive. It's sort of like your own home. You don't like the government coming in and telling you what you do in your own house. I wish they would look at that more carefully these days. But I think that was part of this. The Afghans, and this has been known for a long time.
Yeah.
History has shown that they're a type of people who just want to be left alone, and if they're making their mistakes, they're going to suffer their own consequences. People ought to back off and say, yes, there could be and should be changes on their attitudes, but it has to be totally voluntary and by others set an example. But to use force and use 20 years and $2 trillion and $88 billion to build the army, a local army that will guarantee that they will have a democracy like the United States.
Yeah.
Well, the money didn't go very well. It didn't buy us very much.
It didn't. Well, I noticed a couple of absurdities that I wanted to put up, Dr. Paul. The first one, I think, says everything you need to know about the vapidness of the mainstream media. If we can put up that first clip. Here's CNN. The reporter from one day to the next put on some head coverings. Here's what she reported, the CNN reporter. They're just chanting death to America, but they seem friendly at the same time. CNN. And the other one is just to show, this is literally a month before the fall of Kabul. And this just goes to show that our U.S. Embassy there had its priorities in order. Let's look at this next clip. Their priorities were straight. U.S. Embassy Kabul, flying the rainbow flag. They were focused on virtue signaling and focused on social engineering and celebrating Pride Month. Meanwhile, they were about ready to get overthrown.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And the last one, sorry to do this, Dr. Paul, but the next one just shows everything's wrong with the political class in America. I know you don't like naming names, but this one deserves to be named. If we can look at that next clip. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, he's furious that we're leaving. It's only been 20 years. He says what will unfold in Afghanistan will be a humanitarian crisis. The regime that is taking power is one that routinely violates human rights, particularly the rights of women. Afghan women who have voted, gone to school, and lived independently for 20 years will suffer the most. So according to GOP leader McCarthy, we should just stay forever so that the women can vote.
But the blame game is going to go on, and I think it's dividing Democrats right now. You know, there aren't that many principled progressive left. Maybe Bill Maher's coming back into the fold in opposing some of this nonsense. But you know, the Democrats are sort of split, and they want to support the president, but that's getting more difficult. And also, you just pointed out, this is bipartisan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. McCarthy's objecting. Yeah, but he wasn't objected when they were voting to send him. And there were comments during the Trump administration about, you know, a different type of foreign policy, but it didn't end up with it. It was always more, which was a reflection of our friends, you know, in the military-industrial complex. They are really talented in keeping war going and keeping the money flowing.
And that's the thing about someone like McCarthy, and there are plenty more like him, and we're not just picking on him. But it's this idea that they wrap this whole thing in the flag, but if this is not the misuse of the military, I don't know what is. Sending our military to occupy a foreign country for 2 decades so that they have a better human rights record or something, it really is a misuse, and it says everything about it. But you mentioned something about an article we both read from our friend Colonel Doug McGregor, and I think it had some great points to be made. You know.
Yeah, he's been our friend, and he's worked with us. I believe he's been on our program.
He's spoken
and
at our conferences,
we did a lot. And I think we did help to get President Trump's attention.
Yeah.
And he is very interested. But he's good because he understands the philosophy, but his total emphasis isn't there. He becomes a little more pragmatic, which is important too, to make sure that the movement moves in our direction, which we could support. So he did have a plan, but didn't get very far, did it?
It was fascinating. He told this story himself before, and he's also told to me. But he came in at the very last moments of the Trump presidency. He had been nominated to be ambassador to Germany, but that didn't go anywhere because Trump didn't fight for him. So he nominated him at the very end to be a special advisor to the Secretary of Defense. And what he did is he came up with a plan, and he wrote down a very specific plan. Here, Mr. President, is how we can get out of Afghanistan right now. And the president looked at it and was very impressed, and he signed a national security directive. It was off to the races. We were going to get out of there. Finally, after all this time, well, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the president's national security advisor said, Mr. President, you can't do this, you can't do this. And sadly, as usual, the story of the Trump presidency, he got cold feet, he backed off, he let it go. And so the idea now that he's attacking Biden for finally getting out, it's a little bit rich, I think.
You know, we're talking a lot about what happened then and getting out and the problems we're seeing today, but I want to just touch for a short moment about how it really got started. Of course, 9/11 had a lot to do with it, and which was a major, if not the major, domestic military event we had, with that attack. And one of the first things the Congress did was they came up with this idea that the American people had to be reined in.
Yeah.
So they rushed the Patriot Act through. And I was jokingly being very cynical. I said they went to the drawer and they say, well, we have an emergency here. Let's pull this. Oh yeah, we have this Patriot Act. We've been trying for a long time, to do something. So the Patriot Act just sailed through. But also this whole thing about the authority to use military force it has been totally abused, which means that even when you write it into law or write it into the Constitution, you can't trust them. That's the problem that we have today. But they use this to go in. We went in with massive forces. It looks like the Taliban run for the hills, and it looked like it was all over, and it would be smooth sailing, and they would be Democrats forever, and there would be peace in Afghanistan. And for one time, the old saying that nobody will ever defeat the tribes in Afghanistan. Well, that wasn't true. But what was true is they got things mixed up. The Patriot Act was designed to watch out for the Taliban coming here and watching for the terrorism and where is the Al-Qaeda. And of course, people don't realize that the Taliban's not the Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
But anyway, they were mixing it up. But at the same time, they were saying the Al-Qaeda is really in Iraq, which wasn't true either. But that was part of it. But you'd think on the surface it looked like, well, he wants a war. They want a war. They'll do it with Iraq. But no, they all of a sudden, no, it's Afghanistan that they had to go in. And I remember very clearly some people I was reading and studying. It doesn't mean it was proof, but my suspicions were, my intuition was that after we got in there, the main goal of what we were doing was to find a haven for bin Laden.
Yeah.
But that may be way over the top, but essentially happened. They had them at Tora Bora. They had them surrounded, and it was a mountain area where they had them. And all of a sudden, we can't find them. We can't find them. How long did it take? Years and years. They found, he's in Pakistan. That's where he is. So, the policies and the distortions are so great, but to justify moving the troops, they have to have something. And we do know that the pressure came, from the military-industrial complex and others. The support was very, very bipartisan. They're not going to challenge that. And just like right now, even though McCarthy and some Democrats are fussing, it doesn't look like it's going to change policy. I think this is going to continue. If you look at all the places where we don't have the marching troops in there, we don't have the tanks, but we have a few people there as advisors.
Yeah. And that's why Doug McGregor's piece is really good. It's in today's American Conservative. It's definitely worth reading. It's about all the uniformed officers who never spoke up, who never had the courage to say this is wrong, who never had the courage to really put America first. And it's a great piece. But I remember back then, Dr. Paul, when you had a solution that you put forth, and you put forth the idea, and you wrote about this in your column this week. You put forth the idea of letters of marque and reprisal. If we identify the people who were involved in the attack, well, let's go get them. And of course, at the time, everyone laughed. That Ron Paul, he's so kooky. Where does he come up with these ideas? And it's very funny this morning, and I don't want to embarrass you, but it's very funny this morning that you've been trending on Twitter all morning with Ron Paul was right, and everyone's putting up your speeches from the time. They didn't want to hear that back then because they wanted a good old war.
And people will say, how can you use that? That was that old history, and they never really used it. And this is the Taliban and this sort of thing. And the explanation for this is very, very simply that if you do have it, but it isn't. What they're doing is they're sort of deputizing free, private industries, and they started by protecting shipping.
Yeah.
The shipping said that people could be a legal entity of the government, and it would be recognized. It was internationally recognized, and the Congress had to approve it. It wasn't like a bunch of people got up and they had a private force that they could go over and invade in the name of the United States.
Yeah.
Like they can't say anything we were doing that had a remote relationship to marque and reprisal. So the principle, I think, is very good. There's the possibility, I bet somebody could sit down and make a case for maybe deputizing some people to get Adolf Hitler, something like that. But it wouldn't be, what do? We have a policy now, I think it was started with Obama, of murdering American citizens without even charges or trials or anything else, just often kill them.
Yeah.
And yet that killing individuals that are a real threat, is a big deal. And the best restraint could be that there has to be a vote in the Congress. It has to be overwhelming in support of this. But I think back then, the origination of that was for piracy, and this freedom of the seas. And of course, what amazes me is that they carried that and they used that all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Right, our government was only a couple years old, and I keep thinking that's still a long way off for me to do it. But anyway, they did use it. The principles there, and we didn't get our bill passed.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it may have actually worked very well to get the bad guys, but the problem is there were a lot of mansions built in McLean on the back of this 20-year war. There's a lot of profiteering, and if they had just gone out and taken out the bad guys, there wouldn't have been all that money going into the pockets of the well-connected. Now, do you want to actually, this is a similar thing, do you want to move on to this next one? Because another creation of the post-9/11 world was the Department of Homeland Security, which you also opposed very rigorously at the time. You said, you warned, they're going to not go against the bad guys, they're going to eventually turn against us. This is literally something that came out over the weekend. If we can look at that next clip. This is from the Department of Homeland Security. They're issuing a new terrorist alert. Here are the potential terror threats that we must look out for. Opposition to COVID measures. Get your jab. Claims of election fraud. Belief that Trump can be reinstated. The 9/11 anniversary and upcoming religious holidays. These are all terrorist threats. What do you think, Dr. Paul?
I wonder where this all came from. That really morphed into something very much worse than I had dreamed, that it would be such public policy. Now, and this was on regular television, and you'd wonder whether anybody tends to be impressed with this and start looking at these issues a little bit differently. That's the only thing that really counts. But of course, if we don't call attention to it, they're the ones who are using it for propaganda. They think it's to their benefit. And we're hoping and praying this will wake up Americans. You know, that these plans don't just pop out of thin air. They usually get the authority, you know, like the story about the Patriot Act. I thought that was horrible. They had written that years before, but they were waiting for an opportunity. There's an emergency, and there will be another emergency. It's maybe this will pass, and there won't be any more major killing in the near future in Afghanistan. But I tell you what, long term, we haven't given up our empire one bit. It's losing some credibility, and that is good. But the empire is still entrenched. We still have a lot of money, and as long as the dollar holds up as the world reserve currency, we're going to get away with this. And there's a time when we won't get away with it, and we'll have to change our ways.
And I honestly didn't believe this was true. As cynical as I am, I thought this is a hoax. So I went and I looked and I found the original clip from NBC News. It actually is a Homeland Security report. So, you know, you are potentially a terrorist if you prefer ivermectin over getting a shot. Yeah, it's very bad news. Well, we have a couple of other small ones that we're going to talk about a little bit today.
Yeah, this we could almost make entertaining. Scare ways, or in a scary way. But one of our least favorite prime ministers, and we have several.
Yeah, we have several.
We have several. And we want people to be tolerant, but sometimes if you tolerate evil, that's not good either.
Yeah.
But I don't know all the details of this prime minister, but the one I'm talking about is United Kingdom.
Yeah.
They have a guy over there that is controversial, even in the regular media, Boris Johnson. And he wants to be involved, and now the announcement from over the weekend is Johnson wants to recall Parliament from summer recess over the Afghan issue. I wonder what he wants to do. Does he want to stir up trouble, or is he going to send in a plane to help carry him out? But he has some troops over there, and maybe secretly they'll have the next plan on where we're going to park these people who are not going to act like they're pro-American and this sort of thing. But I thought, that's really not going to give me a sigh of relief and say, good, now we can relax. Johnson is going to take care of the problem.
He'll probably bring the troops home and put them out against his own people who are avoiding his restrictions.
Oh, boy.
In fact, I think you had a report out of the UK about the lockdowns, if I'm not mistaken, over there on the side that you were going to bring up, because that's another sick report.
This is, but it goes along with us trying to point out the medical complications of what's going on. Lockdown created 1 million new alcoholics in England.
Wow.
You know, that must be a characteristic of authoritarianism and even Marxism, because I don't hear the same sayings. I'm sure they still have alcoholics in Russia.
Yeah.
But I guess it's not quite like it was when they were totally destitute under the Soviet empire, when they held it. But here it is, new alcoholics under these conditions. And who's the enemy? Their government's the enemy. They're the ones who have imprisoned their people.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening here. But a lot of people don't want to use those words. They can still find a statistic and say 51% of the people say lockdown is good, and therefore it's okay, and the majority rules.
Yeah. Well, alcoholism is a long-term, long-term illness that takes people's lives, but against a virus that has a 99% chance of recovery, I guess they feel that it's worth it. It's bad news.
There's a little.
We have an update,
a little update on Texas Supreme Court temporarily blocked the mask mandate issue. So it was a victory for the governor.
Yeah, temporary victory. Hopefully it's permanent.
At least he's on the surface fighting for our side, and it's too bad that we got so far along. But there's still people that are cheering him on to hope he wins this. And boy, some of the stories from the teachers, it's just really heartbreaking on the stories they tell and the suicides that still go on. But it isn't only the United States and England. Our friends in Sydney, Australia, still they're fighting that too. And I've just been disappointed with Australia. I thought maybe they were sort of like Texas or something, but it doesn't turn out like that. COVID in Sydney. They think the solution comes from they just need to use more of their own military, to use military force to enforce quarantines. And you know, the vaccine passports, and that of course is our greatest danger, is that movement. And there was a suggestion that eventually they would like to see in this country that the vaccine passport be used interstate. That's pretty bold. It's a mixed thing. I hope this is so bad that it's going to wake up, many more millions of people and say, hey, this is going too far, but we don't know what will happen there.
It remains to be seen. I mean, there were reports over the weekend that Biden was considering requiring vaccinations to be able to travel interstate. Right. And that is terrifying. Well, I think that's about all we have today.
Okay, that sounds good. We're okay. No, I just want to finish once again where we started. Thanking the people, certainly the viewers here. I am positive that some of the people who attended our conference, are viewing this program, and I want to thank them for coming. And once again, recognize the fact that we could have had a larger crowd, but the rooms weren't available. We eked out our first conference since COVID nonsense started. And even with our conference in Virginia, Daniel should be in the advertising business because he puts it out. And I said, do you think anybody will come? I'm always sort of conservative on this. What if we don't have anybody come to our conferences? And so he gets out there and he tells you about it. And next morning he says, 24 hours, guess how many people we have? We filled the room. So, well, that is good because you have to have some ideas that are popular for the people, and that's the only real weapon we have, is popularizing certain issues and telling the truth. Is not the goal. The goal has never been, for me personally, to get everybody to agree with everything that we do. No, that isn't it. It should be an agreement that people get to do whatever they want, even if you disagree with it, if they're not hurting anybody. That's the wonderful thing about the message. It's the legalization of pro-choices in everything that we do. So this voluntarism is so astounding because it releases the creative energy that we need to produce the peace and the prosperity, and it should attract moderates and progressives that work as long as they want to give. This is the tough part. They have to give up this idea that the government should be used to initiate force to have their way at the punishment of others. And some people want to do that on economic terms, and some people want to do that on social terms, to use the power and authority of government to have their way. And yes, I know it doesn't sound like a great leap. Just allow people to do what they want and just leave them alone. I think that's where the prosperity would come from, because the first thing is you wouldn't have an income tax, and you would be able to make all the decisions on economic matters, how you want to spend your money, and you wouldn't have to worry about when is the next Vietnam War or any war where the draft is going to be available. But they're always sending our money overseas. There's always an authoritarian approach to force results of the people who want to run our lives on them. But I think for sure that the American people, if they ever heard the message of liberty and put it up against the thugs who presents this Marxism, and right now the ones behind cultural Marxism are guilty of being tremendously opposed to the principles of liberty. We are trying to persuade people to just get rid of that idea and think more positively about what it's like to live in a free society. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.